Hello, and welcome to Random Encounter, episode 280. I am Zach Wilkerson, your host for today. And you will notice that there is a noticeable lack of Jono as your host today. And the reason for that is partially because Jono is like sort of on a trip and on vacation, but also because this episode is about something that is decidedly not current, as Random Encounter usually is. Instead, it's about something that is feature related, which I know a lot about as the features manager, and is about our Game of the Year bracket battle. But before I explain what that is, or sort of how this episode is going to look, I want to introduce the rest of our panel, starting with you, Audra.
Hello, hello.
And next, Aleks.
Hello.
And finally, Jimmy.
Hi there.
Welcome, everybody. It's exciting. I have podcasted with Aleks and Audra many times, and I'm very excited to podcast for the first time with you today, Jimmy. And I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today. So anybody who follows the site knows that recently we posted a feature called our Game of the Year bracket battle. This is the 25th anniversary of RPGFan being a thing. Which I think is amazing. I've been following the site since even before it was called RPGFan, so it's really exciting for me personally. But one of these suggestions that one of our staff members had for a good anniversary feature was to kind of put all of our games of the year against each other. Basically thinking about, of all the times that we have voted for a game of the year, what would be the game that would win amongst those, which introduces some interesting sort of conversations, right? Like we've voted for a lot of games maybe in certain years that maybe today, Star Ocean 3, that we might not agree should win a Game of the Year now. But I think it's an interesting sort of intellectual exercise and also kind of a fun thing to kind of talk about it. But the thing that's most exciting about this feature to me is that we're not the ones who are going to decide. It's going to be the readers. You guys will be voting on whatever game you think deserves to win our Game of the Year bracket battle, sort of putting different games against each other. So let me slow down for a second and kind of talk about what that looks like if you haven't seen it yet. So even though we've been open for 25 years, we didn't have a Game of the Year really in our first year because we opened, sort of very late in that year. And so what we've done, because we have 24 games to vote on, is we totally at random, we literally put it into a generator, put all the games into a random generator. And then the first round, we have 3 different games going against each other. So it could be a game from 1999 against a game from 2004 against a game from 2011. I'm just, those years aren't right, but just sort of thinking aloud here. And then whatever the top vote getter is from that round, it will move on to our sort of Elite 8. If you follow college basketball, you know what that's about. And the way that the seeding will go in that round is the top winner, like the game that gets the most votes from the first round. So let's say, for example, Lunar, the Silver Star, or Silver Star Story Complete gets 900 votes. And I don't know, we'll say Star Ocean 3 gets 455 votes, and they're both winners in their bracket. They both have to be winners. Then if Lunar the Silver Star is the top vote getter, it will be the first seed, and it will then face off against the 8th seed, which would be Star Ocean 3, which, we'll see if that wins that round. We'll see. And then we'll kind of go from there. And at each round, you will see new write-ups. You will see new votes from you guys as readers. And so, that's going to be sort of the format of the feature itself. But today we're going to talk about the first round. We're going to talk about all 24 games, at least briefly. We're going to talk about what we think about each division, and we're going to talk about what we think maybe deserves to win, what's going to win. We might have some little debates here and there, but obviously we have a lot of games to talk about, so we're going to keep things a little bit quick. So I guess I will ask everybody on the panel, are there any games for the panel that you're really hoping maybe do well here? Any games that you have an attachment to that you're kind of really rooting for early on? This is a question for the whole panel.
I'd say I have a soft spot for Final Fantasy 12, but a lot of the Final Fantasies and Suikoden 3.
Both good choices. Yeah, we'll talk more about those later. But what about the rest of you?
I'd say my main like underdog pick, like the pick that I don't think is gonna do well, but I think it would be pretty hype if it did. And I've been on record loving this game before, but Final Fantasy 15, I think it has no chance against Endwalker or Final Fantasy 12. But I love that game, doing some interesting things, and I think it's aged very gracefully.
Mhm.
Even though it's
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I actually think that is it's a tough bracket. We'll talk more about it later, but I think the 15 has a chance there.
I that would be really surprising to me.
I really
but,
do.
I hope you're right. I hope people have really opened up on this game after it got kind of a lukewarm reception when it came out, because it's really unique. There's nothing. There hasn't been anything like it since. So yeah, all power to Final Fantasy 15, giving it all my good vibes.
What about Jimmy? What's like a sleeper pick that you're hoping for at the end of this?
Sleeper, I don't know. I think I just want to see one of the BioWare, like the classic BioWare games, go really far. Because some of them are up against some games that I don't think they really stand much of a chance against. I just hope they don't all fall out right away, because some of them are really great.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one encouragement I'll give to our listeners, I think that everybody on staff knows this as well. And I think our readers are even more driven by this. Like a lot of people love JRPGs who read RPGFan and who honestly work at RPGFan, me amongst them. I have less experience with Western RPGs than I probably should. And so that's sort of my bias going into this as your host. I will definitely be rooting for a lot of JRPGs here, like maybe many of our listeners are, but like I know in some of these brackets, the JRPG is not the pick, even if it is our pick. So anyway, but we're just going to kind of go through division by division, talk about the way it looks. If you are curious about our divisions, if you want to look at them as we're going, if you go to rpgfan.com right now, you can see the first round here and these divisions as we're talking about them. And again, from each division, there will only be one winner. So, and your votes are going to be the ones that determine who's the winner here. But sometimes we have a hard time letting these things go. So I'm happy we have the opportunity to kind of talk about what we think should be the winner. So let's start by talking about the very first division, which I think has a fascinating collection of games. I have a very strong opinion about what should win here and about what I love here. I've played all three of these games. There's one of them I actually don't like very much at all, which my partner will be very unhappy to hear, but it's the truth. But in Division 1, we have two very modern games, starting with Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And then we also have Final Fantasy VII Remake, that 2020 Game of the Year winner. And then finally, we have Skies of Arcadia going all the way back to 2000. So what are some people's thoughts on this particular bracket? Things they want to win, things they think will win, things they think are overrated, underrated. What do you guys got?
So I still haven't played Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and I haven't really played much of Skies of Arcadia either, so I can't speak too much on those. But I mean, Skies of Arcadia is just, I feel like the more time goes by, the more like it's heralded as such a classic and just like delightful JRPG from its time. And I think I'd give that one a bit of an edge, I think, over Xenoblade or FF7 Remake. FF7 Remake, I think, could take it. And I think that game is very good ultimately, but there's also quite a few problems you could pick apart with it, kind of narratively and in terms of its setting. So I think I'd go for Skies of Arcadia, despite not having played too much of it. But I think FF7 Remake does have a chance. Xenoblade, I wouldn't be inclined to say it would win that division, but I guess like readers could surprise me.
Yeah, I wonder about recency bias on this one, because I feel Xenoblade 3 is just, it's so new and a lot of people think really highly of it. So
yeah, I mean, I'll kind of jump in here. I've played all three of these games basically since 7 Remake. Actually, 7 Remake is the first game I played here. And then I podcasted about Skies of Arcadia with Retro Encounter recently. And then Xenoblade Chronicles 3 I've podcasted about many times, and I also reviewed it for the site. And I'm going to say very strongly that I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 should win here. which I know may sound like recency bias, but I promise, this is my genuine opinion. Skies of Arcadia. And again, my wife will be very unhappy with me for saying this. I think is by far the weakest of these three games. I think that there are major problems with the writing. I think that, as much as I love parts of it, like I think the exploration is remarkable. I think that there are parts of the combat. I am a turn-based combat sucker. I like parts of it, but some of the writing in this game, I think, is anywhere between mid and kind of offensive. The ways in which they deal with the plight of the underprivileged, I think, is very troubling. I think that there are other games on this list that I think deal with sort of like the Saturday morning cartoon game type of thing a lot better. And I just don't. I don't think it holds up. I honestly think the reason that it hasn't been remade as much as people are calling for it is because there are so many troubling elements to it. I think there are elements to it that are vaguely racist. And I also think that I just feel like I'm listening to like a conservative Republican speak every time I listen to the main character talk. Like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and I'm not here for that.
My God, I did not know these things about Skies of
This
Arcadia.
is just me talking. Again, my wife is just as much politically where I am, and it's her favorite game of all time. So that's where we are. 7 Remake, I think it's a great game. Love it. But the ending troubles me in lots of ways that I have litigated on many podcasts. I will not go through them, but I don't think it believes in itself the way that it does it, or like it's like so meta that it's not a thing. But Xenoblade Chronicles 3 hits some highs that I think that 2 or 3 JRPGs have ever hit. We're talking ending E of Nier Automata type stuff.
I gotta play that.
The end of Chapter 5, beginning of Chapter 6 of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is top tier moment for me. I absolutely think it deserves to be the winner here, but I honestly think that Final Fantasy VII Remake will clean up here because it's Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
The end.
Which is the only thing I will say about it is that I was the target audience for Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I still prefer the original to the remake.
Oh, me too. Yeah. The best thing FF7 Remake has going for me is that combat. I think it's honestly got maybe my favorite combat in any RPG, which is a huge thing going for it. But there are aspects of that game that just didn't quite hit for me at the same time. And I think other people feel that way. But you're right that the FF7 factor is maybe too strong.
Audra, what do you think?
Well, I did find Skies of Arcadia to be kind of charming when I played it, but I can totally see where you're coming from with it too. So,
no, I think there's so many things that are charming about it. So don't let me take you off of it. I think there's so many things that are amazing about it. It's just my personal opinion.
But I think I'm leaning towards either FF7 Remake or Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I haven't played enough of either of them yet to really say for sure, but I feel like they're probably the two stronger, and they're more recent, and everything I've heard about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 kind of has me leaning towards I'd like to see it win, but I don't know if it will.
It's interesting to hear you all saying that the recency bias will probably have an effect here, because I guess where I was coming from at first is assuming there'd be a retro bias for Skies of Arcadia. But,
no,
I could be wrong.
I definitely think that is a factor. I actually think this is the most competitive of any of the divisions.
You might be right. Yeah.
I think that all 3 of these would clean up in all kinds of these divisions, but because our readers, just based on what I see in social media, they love like the retro thing, and Skies of Arcadia in particular does really well for us. And a lot of people love Skies of Arcadia, and I think they could do really well here. I actually think that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is the least likely to win this one, despite the fact that it's the one that's come out the most recently. I actually think that it is nostalgia that will drive the 7 Remake vote. I think back to when we did Game of the Year, like in all our different category votes, like Sephiroth won like best villain that year. And I was like, what? Sephiroth is in this game for like 30 minutes and he's actually presented poorly. Like I think that's a horrible choice. Just in my opinion, I really like Remake. But I think that's going to be enough to push it over the top. But yeah, I mean, like, to me, like, I'm more interested in what you guys think should win.
If I was voting, I'm taking Scars of Arcadia for sure.
That's fair. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we could spend 20 hours talking about Division 1, I think, because I love talking about all three of these games, even if I don't love all three of these games. I mean, I genuinely like Skies of Arcadia. I have some problems with it that I don't have with the other games.
I think you made really good points about it. When I played it, I was much younger.
No, I feel that. Yeah,
it sounds like you probably played it a lot more recently than
sure
I
did.
have. So I'm sure I'm looking at it through some rose-colored glasses. So.
It was a year and a half ago, so it was pretty recent. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
But again, it's just my opinion. So let's talk about Division 2, which I think is highly competitive, but like in an interesting way. So in this division, we have somehow Star Ocean Till the End of Time, which was our 2004 winner. We have Mass Effect 2, which no one's going to question that one, right? In 2010. And then we have, again, no one's going to question this one, The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt. Two of these games are absolute all-time classics. I have not played the Mass Effect 2 or Star Ocean Till the End of Time, and I haven't beaten The Witcher 3, but I played over 100 hours of it.
Classic.
And I think it is an incredible game. So I think this is an interesting matchup. So what does everybody think about this one?
Mass Effect 2 for me, but that's probably more my personal bias.
What do you love about Mass Effect 2?
I love the whole premise, the setup. It's a great sci-fi story, and I just love how they do the different characters and this individual personal side quests and how the final mission comes about and how you can actually alter it depending on your decisions. It's a really great game, I think.
Yeah, part of what makes Mass Effect 2 work so well is the fact that it's all about the characters. Like the plot itself is almost nothing because it's basically preparing for one single mission. That's called like the suicide mission. It's like a mission that people are expecting like we won't get out of it alive. And indeed, like if you make like the wrong choices at the end of the game, then you could end up losing a lot of like kind of the main cast, which will also translate to your playthrough of Mass Effect 3 if you import your file. But up until that point, you're basically just meeting like a great cast of characters. All the characters returning from Mass Effect 1 are way cooler this time around too. Like Tali, Garrus, Liara are so awesome in this game. There's so much more developed, fleshed out, and more well-written characters. And then you got so many interesting newcomers like Thane and Jack. And I think one thing that the game does so well with these characters is like structuring it around them and doing like these loyalty missions where you really get to know them as individuals. And also just like being able to like represent conflict between them, where like not everybody's getting along. Like this is a mission that like you're basically recruiting people based on their proficiency to like make the mission succeed. So there's also like conflict happening on the ship between like some characters at times, and it makes it feel like a lot more real in a sense. And I think Mass Effect 2's got one of the best casts of any RPGs for that reason.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm with you both on Mass Effect 2 should definitely be the winner here. I love Witcher 3, but Mass Effect 2 has got to be one of my top 5, if not top 3 favorite games ever. It's the peak of the Mass Effect trilogy, for sure, just like for all the reasons you said.
Yeah, and as much as I love that game and I just raved about how great it is, I actually prefer Witcher 3, and I both think that will win, and I think it should win based on like just the entire scope and the whole epic experience that game offered, and doing the same things that Mass Effect 2 did well with, like having interesting characters, representing honest conflicts between characters, and the whole like lead up to like the end of that game and the conclusion I got from it like still felt like one of the most rewarding and interesting kind of full narrative experiences I've had with an RPG.
Yeah, I mean, like for me personally, like I have no opinion about Mass Effect 2 except for that like its reputation precedes it, right? Like I know that it is a game that I would like. I've started Mass Effect 1 like 4 times, and like the combat is so janky, I just give up on it. And like you go back to some base, and every time I'm in that base, I just walk around and I get lost, and I'm like, screw this, then I quit. But I own the new ports, and I want to play it. But The Witcher 3, despite the fact that I didn't finish it, is a remarkable achievement in gaming. Like I feel like every RPG that has come after it, whether it's JRPG or whatever, like it sort of lives in the shadow of The Witcher 3, like in the way that the side quest writing is so remarkably strong, which is why I didn't finish it. Like I was so locked into trying to do all these side quests and the writing and how your choices mattered, but like not in ways that annoyed me. Sometimes like when choices matter, I feel like I'm missing out on something. I never felt that way with The Witcher 3. And it takes like the best parts of Grand Theft Auto and it mixes it with like the best parts of so many other elements of RPGs that I think it makes it such a remarkable game. And I think it is, in a lot of ways, even today, unparalleled. Like I haven't played Cyberpunk in the new version of it. And your review of it, Aleks, made me very much want to play 2077. I bought it on launch day, and then like the reviews started pouring in, and I'm like, nope, I'll wait. And I think that now is probably the right time to jump in, because for all the problems that CD Projekt Red might have, they can make a good video game. And The Witcher 3, I think, is remarkable. And notice that none of us have talked about Star Ocean, because none of you should vote for it. Like I haven't played it, and I think I started it, maybe, I don't know. But Star Ocean like pales wildly in comparison to these two games, even though I haven't played one of them.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say about Star Ocean 3 either. I remember I had a friend who played it and kind of liked it, but we were also like 10 years old at the time, so I'm gonna call that 10-year-old bias right there.
That's fair. Okay, so I think that's going to be a competitive matchup, but I am a little bit afraid, honestly, that like that JRPG bias is gonna seep in and Star Ocean's gonna win. But come on, man, like you're talking about like two of the best games ever made, even if I haven't played one of them. Please vote for one of those two. So yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about The Witcher 3 is that like it marries like what we love about JRPGs in terms of like great overall narrative storytelling. I haven't played the DLC, but I've heard that it does the same thing. But it also mixes those Western elements in. Sure, the combat's not amazing, but I've actually heard that like the new version of it that they did pretty recently when they upgraded it for Series X and PS5 has actually helped with some of that. But yeah, I mean, I for me, I haven't played Mass Effect 2, but it would have to be really good to be better than The Witcher 3 to me. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to what I think will be a highly competitive division, which is Division 3. And it has some like serious classics here, man. Like these are some heavy hitters. So to start out with, we have what I think for a lot of our readers is the quintessential JRPG, because a lot of people started with it, which is Final Fantasy X. And then we have what I think a lot of people consider to be the quintessential Western RPG, which is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. And then finally, we have what a lot of people think is the perfection of JRPG, which is Persona 5. This is a tough division for me to call. I don't know what's going to win. I don't know what I think even should win. It is a great division of video games. I have played all three of them. I think they are all remarkable in their own ways. So I will let you guys discuss this because I'm afraid.
Can't they all win? They're all really good games, so it's quite hard to narrow down.
Yeah, so you're so right that there's a lot of quintessential titles in this division. Obviously, Final Fantasy X and KOTOR are both hugely influential and landmark titles for their genres, but Persona 5, because it is just more recent and is just become like a cultural phenomenon in like not just RPGs but like video games, and just like how well that it's like maintained its own brand, like having like different spin-offs coming out, still going strong, the Royal Edition coming out a few years later and kind of even more further solidifying its legacy. It's just like an amazing game, and I think it both will and should win, which is crazy because I love those other two games as well. But yeah, I'm gonna have to give the edge to Persona 5 here.
Yeah, I think probably Persona 5 should, for all the reasons you gave. It's a very strong game.
Jimmy, I know you have an opinion on this one.
Yeah. I'm really pulling for KOTOR on this one. It's just one of my all-time favorites, but I totally do not think that it's going to make it out of this this trio here. And honestly, I mean, any argument you'd have for any of these three games I would find completely valid. They're all fantastic. I just think I'm like you. I probably, if I had to predict, I would say Persona 5 probably makes it out. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if Final Fantasy X did.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally 100% think that Final Fantasy X will win this round by like a fairly sizable margin, actually. And it's not because I don't respect the other two games or that I don't like them. In fact, I think that Persona 5 is probably a slightly better game. There's still there's some jank in KOTOR. Not that KOTOR is not a remarkable achievement for when it came out, because it totally was. And it's still fun to play today. And Persona 5, I think, is probably the better game than Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X, I think, for so many of our readers, is like the game. It's like the JRPG, like the foundation. And I'm much older than that. I'm almost 40 now. It's like when Final Fantasy X came out, I had played dozens of them, and I adored it when it came out. And I still really enjoy it now. Like, I think the turn-based combat there is excellent. It sort of presaged what great turn-based combat became later. You think about like an Octopath Traveler, and like that turn order that you can see in Final Fantasy X is so hugely important. But what's funny is that I don't think most people care about that when they think about Final Fantasy X. It's that story, the voice acting, and I think it was so remarkable for the time, despite the ha 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 ha, that I think it will win, and I will not be upset when it wins. Even though I think Persona 5 will win. Persona 5 is a great game, but like I think it has some thematic problems with the way that it presents some of the issues that it deals with, and it wants to be deeper than it actually is. And I don't know. I think I might pick Final Fantasy X out of this list, even if it was just me. But Persona 5 is an amazing game. I could be wrong, but I think that might be my pick, honestly.
Yeah, one thing I guess that could hold back Persona 5 is that I know some people still like Persona 4 better, and some people even like Persona 3 better, so it's kind of got that competition with it in its own series. Whereas Final Fantasy X, gotta say that there still isn't really another JRPG quite exactly like it. Just the way that it manages to be so good at world building while being so linear remains like a really remarkable achievement that hasn't really been emulated as well since. And KOTOR, as much as I love that game and it's got like a twist worthy of like Empire Strikes Back, I also just like the second game better. I just thought it had like more interesting writing, did some more interesting things with the Star Wars property. So as much as I still really, really like that game, to me it did get surpassed by its sequel.
Yeah, that's completely fair.
I think that's accurate.
I haven't played the sequel, so I have no opinion, but I do think that KOTOR is an amazing game. So we'll see. I'm curious to see how that one shakes out. I think it's a highly competitive division for lots of reasons. But speaking of competitive divisions, I think this one is also really tough. And it's Division 4, for those of you who are reading. And it's our Final Fantasy division. This is the way it came out randomly. And like originally, Mike Salvato, the editor-in-chief, were like, should we let this stand? And we're like, yeah, actually, I think we should, because I think it's fun. Like there's so many different games and types of games kind of at play here. And they're all games that I think I like more than most people. So first we have Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker, which is the most recent expansion for Final Fantasy XIV. Then we have Final Fantasy 15, which came out in 2016. And then we have much maligned at the time, but I think embraced now because it's a masterpiece, Final Fantasy 12. I have an opinion here, but it's actually tougher than maybe some people might think. So what does everybody else think about this division?
Firstly, I love that it happened. I think having a Final Fantasy division is hilarious and great. And I think like despite the fact that all of these are like MMO inspired Final Fantasy games, that they all just do their own thing and do them well. And it's just such a testament to the variety that the series offers. I haven't yet gotten to Endwalker in my FF14 journey, but I'm sure it's amazing and caps off the story that's been building up all this time really well. Final Fantasy 12 is one that I really like the story of, and like the world, the Ivalice. I love all the different Ivalice games quite a bit, but it's a game that usually starts dragging for me about like 2/3 of the way through, where it's like, oh, it's another open zone where I walk around having to auto battle enemies. I'm still enjoying myself, but not my favorite thing. And then there's Final Fantasy 15, which is just, as I said earlier, a big personal favorite for me, and I hope can somehow scrounge its way through this division.
I have such a soft spot for Ivalice that I think I'm leaning towards FF12 just because I loved that game when I first played it, even before the Zodiac Age stuff came out. But it's tricky because Endwalker is really, really good too, and actually I do enjoy Final Fantasy 15, so this is another tough bracket for me. But personally, I like 12, so I think I'm leaning towards it. I'm rooting for it, but tricky.
I think I'm right there with you. I think if I was picking, I would pick 12. I think 14 is probably what wins here because I feel like just our audience is very passionate about that game. And I can't speak to the game and I've tried a couple of times to go down that rabbit hole of playing Final Fantasy 14, and I always fall off right away. So I think it's just not for me. I just probably don't have the time, honestly, for an MMO in my life anymore.
I think you have multiple children, so that's fair. Yes.
Yeah. So, but and 15, I did not like 15 at the beginning. I kind of set it aside for a while and then went back to it later and have much higher opinions of it now. But if I'm going to pick, it's going to be 12 for me.
I think this is a fascinating division because I think all of these games are games that I think will grow as like in terms of their appreciation as they go. And I say that as Endwalker is not technically over yet. But Final Fantasy 14 Endwalker, if I had to pick a top 5 favorite games and I couldn't include 14 as a whole game, which would be my number 1 game probably, would be in my top 5. So my pick would be Endwalker because it hits such high highs. Like some of the emotional moments there are remarkable, but it's also unfair. Like it's building on, for me, even as a person who started in Shadowbringers, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours of time. And the thing that's most remarkable about Endwalker is that it does something that games and narratives in general struggle with, which is that it ties a bow on a very long and very detailed and very interesting narrative and a very like sort of mystery box narrative in a fascinating way. I think that Endwalker has the best combat in Final Fantasy 14. I think it has the best story. Yes, Shadowbringers and Heaven's Word stands. That's what I'm saying. I think it is an amazing achievement in video games. But the thing is, like, Final Fantasy 15 is a game that I had sort of fallen off of JRPGs for a long time. It got me back into JRPGs. I love the hunts. The combat is easy, but it was exactly what I needed when it came out. And I think like the characterization work there is amazing. I actually think that like the party dynamics, even though I think 16 is a vastly superior game, are much better in 15. And 12, I came too late. I didn't play it until it released as a Zodiac Age. And if you had to ask me what my favorite single player Final Fantasy game is until 16 came out, which that would be my answer now. Like, it would have been between that and 6. And I think it's an amazing game. I think the gambits are so fun to play with. I think that the characters are great. I think that the experimentation is amazing. I think the fact that no game before or since has done what it does, and it also does it remarkably well. Like, the gambit system works really well. Like, I don't care if you don't like it. It's great. Like, it's so well done. And the Evilly setting, I love too. I'm a huge tactics fan. I think it's an amazing game. I actually genuinely think that 15 is going to win this matchup. I actually think it's probably the weakest of the 3, but that is damning it with high praise because I think that it is a great game too. And people make fun of Final Fantasy 15 all the time, but it's so fun. It has great party dynamics. It knows what it is. And even though it totally is weird in the second half, I think it's still like, it's such a unique thing. I think is remarkable.
It's really just like brimming with personality in every angle, and sure, there's like a lot of cracks in that personality, and as a game it's pretty unfinished in some ways, but even in that second half when you go on like the last couple chapters and there are all these like weird experimental things, it's trying to do something with its storytelling. It's trying to do something new with how it like has you relate to its characters, and for that reason, like it's such a special, unmatched achievement in a lot of ways for me. But I feel the kind of opposite way of you on the front that like FF15 is my favorite game here, but I think Endwalker's gonna win, which is yeah.
You know, maybe this is a person who knows like sort of what the back end of our clicks are like, but 14, despite how much like half of the staff loves it, is not loved by our readers.
Really?
It doesn't get any traffic. So I think it is by far the underdog here, personally.
Well, you might be right about that one.
I think it's a really interesting division. I'm really curious to see how it works out. Like I'm rooting for Endwalker because Endwalker is so good. Gosh, that last trial, there's so many moments in Endwalker that are just like top tier. But we'll see. So moving on from our Final Fantasy division, we're going to move to Division 5, which I will call our semi-Dragon Quest division, because let's be honest, there's no chance anything but a Dragon Quest game wins out of this division.
Sorry, Witcher 2.
Yeah, sorry, Witcher 2.
Oh, that was my pick to win the whole thing.
So we have 3 games in this division. And again, this was just like a coincidence that we thought was kind of fun. So we have 3 games. Dragon Quest 11. Echoes of Elusive Age, that was our Game of the Year winner in 2018. The Witcher 2, Assassin of Kings, 2011, which somehow beat Dark Souls. And then we have our 2005 winner, which is Dragon Quest 8. We could talk about The Witcher 2 if we want, but let's be honest, it's not going to win this division. There's no way. It's impossible. But I do think that the conversation between these 2 Dragon Quest games is fascinating, especially if you've played them, because I have an opinion here, but it is like a razor thin margin. So what does everybody think about this division?
I haven't played Dragon Quest 8 yet, so I'm leaning towards 11 just because I loved it.
I know you loved it. Tell me why.
It's just an amazing game. I mean, I played it on the Switch and I thought it was gorgeous looking, and just the plot, the characters, the dialects that they did for everybody. It was brimming with personality and charm, and I don't know, I just loved it.
So I know there are people who like Dragon Quest 8 a lot, and that it's like their favorite Dragon Quest even. And I played Dragon Quest 8 around the time that it came out, but I also played Dragon Quest 11. And to me, 11 is just a better Dragon Quest 8 because you get that fully like fleshed out, beautifully drawn and visualized 3D Akira Toriyama-esque fantasy world. You get like a great cast of characters. That 11's cast is far better than 8's in my opinion. It's just a giant game with like multiple distinct narrative acts in it that is full of like different plot twists and surprises. Dragon Quest 11 is, I think, the closest thing to like a perfect RPG that I've ever played. I have zero criticisms that I could possibly bring against it. I think it should win this division, and I think it will.
So for me, I'm one of those Dragon Quest VIII is my favorite Dragon Quest people that you're talking about. But I think a lot of that is because I was a lot more casual back when it came out. So it was the first Dragon Quest I played. I never played one up until that point. And so like with Final Fantasy VII being my first Final Fantasy, it's also my favorite still, and Dragon Quest VIII still sits there for me. But I can't really speak to Dragon Quest XI because it's been on my backlog and it just got buried back there, and I really need to play it, especially considering I own 2 copies of it. I own the PlayStation and the Switch copy.
Oh, you must
and
play
I still haven't played it. So
play the Switch version for the record.
Okay.
Yeah,
Switch.
sure.
I default to the Switch version when there's a choice anyway. So I think you've all convinced me that I really need to play this game. And I will just say, I do love Witcher 2. But I was of all the games on this list when I first looked at the whole list, it was the one that surprised me the most that it made the list, if that makes any sense. I did not know that it was thought of favorably when it came out. So yeah, I do like the game, but it surprised me that it was on here.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my understanding, at the time, there were some people on staff, because Game of the Year is voted on by staff, that were very much a fan of The Witcher 2. Talking like the Kyle Millers of the world. This is going back before my time, but yeah, sort of putting aside the game that will not win. This is actually a very difficult choice for me. I think Dragon Quest XI is definitely my choice for what can, should, and will win. But Dragon Quest VIII has some things going for it for me that distinguish it from other Dragon Quests. I think that the what's it called? The tension system? Yeah. I think that's what it's called. Is that right, everybody?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think that adds a level of depth to the combat that 11 for me doesn't quite have. I've 100%ed, at least within reason. I didn't quite platinum 11, but it's because I didn't level or get every weapon or some crazy stuff like that. I think that for me, 8, and I didn't beat 8 until I beat the 3DS version of it, so maybe this is unfair. But I really loved the depth of the combat in Dragon Quest VIII. I thought that it was deeper than any other Dragon Quest, and I've played them all except for 10. I thought it was deeper than any other Dragon Quest in terms of the combat, but the reality is 11 is the better game. It is, I know Mike Solosi likes to say the phrase that Dragon Quest VII is the most Dragon Quest, but I actually slightly disagree with him in that I think 11 is the most Dragon Quest. It is Dragon Quest to the core, and Dragon Quest is the most important game in the genre. Whether we like the series or not, JRPGs don't exist without this game. And 11 takes all those concepts, maintains them, and modernizes them in a way that is accessible and fun and Sylvando. If it's not Sylvando, it doesn't matter. The epilogue
Yes.
there is amazing. The credit sequence, which I won't spoil for those of you who haven't played 11, made me weep openly and for a lengthy period of time, because I originally played Dragon Quest with my grandparents, and my relationship with them is very important. And the fact that it did what it did was insane. It's an incredibly fun game. It is incredibly tight. It is it is, in my opinion, the most perfect RPG. The best? No. The best one is not on our list, and the name is Nier Automata, but it is the most perfect RPG.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is 100% the deserving winner from this round. And I think that it might be the most deserving winner in all of our rounds, but that's my pick in this round, personally.
Yeah, my partner likes watching me play. She likes watching my face when I'm playing different video games to kind of gauge my experience with that game. And from her perspective, me playing Dragon Quest XI was just a bright smile on my face the entire time. And yeah, that about sums up my 150s or so hours with that game.
That is a perfect way to sum it up.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Yeah, it's such a good game. If you haven't played Dragon Quest XI, Jimmy, you should definitely go play it, even though it's over 100 hours long. It's so good. So in this next round, Division 6 is a really interesting division to me because the three games are so different, almost different genres. They're not, but they're just so different in the way they play. So we have a Western RPG in Dragon Age Origins, which was our game of the year in 2009. And then we have Suikoden 3, which, I love Suikoden, which came out in 2002, was our game of the year. And then we have Lunar, Silver Star Story Complete, our namesake, the thing that started LunarNet, which then eventually started RPGFan, as in our Division 6. So I have a very strong opinion here, and I will express it in a moment here, but I'll let other people express their opinions first.
I'm torn between Dragon Age Origins and Suikoden 3, mainly because I'm just very biased towards Suikoden 3. I love Suikoden as well, but Dragon Age Origins is a really good game. I love the different origins and how just fitting it is for they carry over depending on which storyline you're playing through. It keeps coming up, and there's so much decision importance in the game, and maybe I'm leaning towards Dragon Age Origins overall. Just to be a little different, but it's close between it and Suikoden 3 for me. And then I also just love the Lunar Silver Star Story Complete, so this is actually a really tough bracket for me.
So we had a little bit of a discussion pre-show. For context, I've played the PSP version of Lunar Silver Star, but to me, it was quite a vanilla RPG experience, and I'm not a huge vanilla kind of guy.
That's fair.
So I am willing to give this game another shot, and it's cool that it was the first game of the year we had here. But for me, this is a toss-up between Suikoden 3 and Dragon Age Origins, which are both really cool games in their own right. The whole Origins kind of story, like origin micro stories that you have to start your game, depending on what kind of character you're building, are fantastic, and such an interesting way to really get your player invested into the world and the character that they're developing, despite being a player-driven kind of cypher Western RPG type character. Those origin stories just added a lot of characterization that I thought was great. I ended up playing the Dwarf Noble one, and had such a great experience, and just having that little hour or two at the beginning of the game in that little origin story segment just influenced the way I role played that game throughout the entirety of the experience, which was really impressive. And I'm surprised that it hasn't really been done again since, as far as I know. But Suikoden 3 I also love, and is to my slight shame the only Suikoden game I've beaten so far.
You're fired.
Suikoden 2 has been at the top of my backlog for so long. And then the remaster got announced. I'm like, I guess I should wait, and I have, and I'm really waiting for that to come out because I want to play Suikoden 2 so bad. But
okay, you almost redeemed yourself, almost.
I'm signed up for the card, the podcast card for when that remake does come out. So
we'll be talking about it. Don't you worry.
Yeah. But 3 is an awesome game. Really cool thing that it does with kind of its 3 characters, who also just to compare to Dragon Age Origins, also really get you into kind of the depth and characterization of these protagonists before the whole story kind of comes together and becomes this epic sweeping narrative. And both games are great in their own right and at what they do. This is a really tough toss up for me. I might give Suikoden 3 a slight edge, but maybe for historical reasons, Lunar is my expected will get picked.
Yeah, I'm going to cut in here for a second because everybody who's listening to this who has heard me on podcasts, and most of you probably have, will know that Suikoden 2, despite the fact that I think Automata is a better game, is my favorite game of all time, and it is my lowest pick on this list, despite the fact that I haven't played one of them. Suikoden 3, and I agree with everything you said, Aleks. I actually think Suikoden 3 is the weakest of the series, and yes, I'm including 4 in that list.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I think that Suikoden 3 is incredibly slow.
It is.
Like to a point that like it makes it not fun. And I remember when I first played it as a kid, I thought like in retrospect, like, oh, I just didn't like it because it wasn't as interlocked as Suikoden 1 or 2 are. Because Suikoden 1 and 2 are like basically to me like twin games. Like you play them together. And Suikoden 3 is not that. It takes place later. They're trying a different thing. They're doing other stuff. But I think that the characterization is weaker. I think that the combat is mediocre. It tries to do interesting things, but by trying to do interesting things, it just makes itself clunky. And I think that the narrative itself, well, I think it has some interesting things, and I agree with you, Aleks. That I think the best part of it is that you get to pick a certain thing. I won't spoil it. There are things about it that I like, and I think that there are things about it that are really excellent. But I think that it moves. It's just a slow pace that it hurts itself. And I usually like slow-paced things, but this is not one of them. Whereas Origins, I've never played, and I think that probably it is the best game in this division, but I also don't think it will win because of the biases of our readers. But one of my favorite games of all time, by far, is Lunar, the Silver Star Story Complete. And it's funny because I just recently played the Silver Star second CD for review, which I haven't even written it yet, but it will post on the website at some point for reasons. And the difference between that and the Silver Star are enormous. I think that the way that it was the video game that made me realize that what I care about is characters, and what I care about is people, and what I care about is the way things are written. As an English teacher now, that's an incredibly important thing to me. Like you can tell the exact same narrative in different ways, and it's the way you tell it, and it is the way you write it that makes a difference to me. Now, I'm not going to argue that the Silver Star Story Complete is like some remarkable piece of literature. It's not Proust, but it is to me like the game that taught me that what I care about is characters, and it's because it draws its characters so well, and because it uses a genre trope and a way of storytelling so effectively that, like, I think it is a beautifully written game. I know working designs, everybody has their opinions about them, but Silver Star Story Complete is the essential version of that game to me, and I would love to go replay it right now. So those are my feelings about that game. And it's also the one that I am very confident will win this match.
Plus, it brings about Eternal Blue Complete later on, and I love that.
Indeed,
one.
It does.
Yep.
What about you, Jimmy? What do you think?
Well, I'm a big Dragon Age fan, so by default here, that would be my favorite. I like Lunar a lot too, but Dragon Age is definitely, I hate to sound, I'm coming across on this podcast, I realize sounding like a Western RPG elitist here, but it really is. It's one of my favorites of all these games here, so it wins for me.
You're not coming across that way at all. I think that if it manages to win Game of the Year for us, given who we are as a site, that means it's a pretty remarkable game, usually. So, yeah. So, as much as I have not played Dragon Quest Origins, I also haven't played Dragon Age Inquisition because I am totally the Western RPG. I haven't played. I am an RPGFan reader type person, and I need to play them, and I want to. It just hasn't happened. But anyway, let's talk about Division 7, which does include Dragon Age Origin, which is our Game of the Year winner in 2014. But it also includes a controversial title, Mass Effect 3, which is our Game of the Year in 2012. And then finally, we have another Final Fantasy 14 pick, which is Final Fantasy 14 Shadowbringers, which came out in 2019 and was our Game of the Year winner that year. So I'm curious, what are our thoughts on this bracket?
So for me, I looked at this bracket and thought, as at least with Dragon Age and Mass Effect, they're like the games that the predecessor is better than. If I had to sum it up, at least for me anyway, Dragon Age Origins is a better game than Inquisition. Mass Effect 2 is a far better game than Mass Effect 3, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And I actually, that was another game that I kind of was a little surprised made the list. I did not realize that it won Game of the Year because there were so many negative opinions about it when it was first released with the whole ending and all that. So if I had to pick a winner, I'd probably say that Final Fantasy 14 wins here. If I had to predict, if I'm picking for myself, I'd probably go ahead and go with Inquisition just for, like I mentioned before, I can't really speak to Final Fantasy 14. And I definitely like Inquisition better than Mass Effect 3.
Yeah, knowing the JRPG slant of our readership and the fact that Mass Effect 3 and Inquisition are both critiqued titles in their respective series, I think it's Shadowbringers gets an easy win here. I tried Inquisition. I haven't played through all of it yet, but I thought it had some like cool ideas with how it like established like a camp that you're kind of developing, and that kind of like branches off into the world, and that you kind of like send on these little recruitment missions and such, and how it like kind of brought together different themes and ideas from the earlier games was cool from what I saw, but it also had this like kind of really slow paced MMO kind of structure to it. And then Mass Effect 3, like you said, Jimmy, is just worse than Mass Effect 2 straight up. Combat is maybe a little better, if anything, but not that much even. And yeah, just like the writing got a lot less interesting. I'm pretty sure like one of the lead writer from the first two games had left BioWare at that point, and you can feel it. That the character development just isn't as interesting, and the conclusion is divisive for a reason. So yeah, surprised to see both those games up, and I think Shadowbringers gets an easy win here.
I think the issue with Mass Effect 3 in comparison to 2 is they kind of abandoned some of the RPG elements in favor of shooter elements.
Yeah.
So I think really that's where it's weaker. Whereas, and you could say that the RPG elements are a little too much in the first Mass Effect, so they kind of streamlined it a little bit for Mass Effect 2, which is why it's so good, I think. But then for 3, they almost did a little too much leaning into just, okay, this is an action game now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I probably lean towards Shadowbringers for this bracket. Just overall, I'm a huge fan of what they do with the story in it, and I kind of just love the plot and the character progression, and just the Crystarium in general is great. So
I agree. I, as a person who, if you've listened to the rest of this podcast or any podcast I've been on, you know that I haven't played these other two games. Shadowbringers to me crystallizes by that I mean like it makes what it is the best MMO what the MMO is, and that is Shadowbringers. Like it eliminates TP, which if you are new to Final Fantasy 14, you don't even know what that is. But from everything I've heard, that elimination is essential. But Shadowbringers is so amazing on so many fronts. It opens up like so many possibilities for the future of what 14 is going to become. It has a remarkable story. It has the best villain in the history of Final Fantasy, and yes, I know Kefka exists. It has some of the best trials, boss fights. It is such a unique experience in terms of the MMO scene, that I think that even though you don't see WoW anywhere on this list, and I understand that absence is maybe troubling to some people, it crystallizes how you can take a specific genre that is an MMO and turn it into a thing that is mostly a single player experience, but also have those MMO trappings and make it masterful. And I think that Shadowbringers is remarkable on that front, even if like I actually prefer the story of Heaven's Word and Endwalker both, but Shadowbringers from a gameplay perspective and what it crystallizes how to make an MMO just accessible enough to make it something that a lot of people want to play. And there's a reason there was a huge influx. Like I think the subscriber base tripled after Shadowbringers came out. That and you know the streamers who started it, I won't even say their names here because I don't like them, but they're certainly part of it. But I think that's also because Shadowbringers is such a remarkable achievement in gaming, in that it takes a particular genre and makes it another thing in a way that I don't think anyone expected. And to me, that makes it deserving. However, again, I will say that our reader base does not love MMOs. That means they don't really care about 14, no matter how much the rest of the staff, and I mean like almost the rest of the staff loves it. So I actually think Mass Effect 3 is going to take it here.
It's interesting because I liked both Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect 3, just not as much as their as Origins and V2. So it's an interesting thing because I'm like, they're solid games, but they're not quite, to me, as good as their predecessors.
Right. Whereas Shadowbringers was, even if you like the Heaven's Word story better, from a gameplay perspective, is absolutely what 14 is and what it needed to become.
Yeah.
So, speaking of rounds where I don't have a ton to say, and also Final Fantasy 14, we have our final division, Division 8, which is, again, 3 very different games. So, first of all, we have our Game of the Year winner in 2007, which is Persona 3, which I'll just say right now, I haven't played. I cannot wait for the remake. I'm going to play it so fast because it's like the only Persona game that I want to play, which is, not Persona 1, that I haven't played. And then we have Fallout 3, which is our winner in 2008. And then we have Final Fantasy 14, A Realm Reborn, the expansion that turned Final Fantasy 14 into the at least shell of what it would become. So what does everybody think about this matchup?
I love that you referred to Final Fantasy 14 Realm Reborn as the shell of what Final Fantasy 14 is now, because that's exactly how it felt playing it. I was surprised to see Realm Reborn on here. I get that it was like a huge rebirth for the game, obviously. One of the biggest comeback stories in all of gaming history. But playing through the base game of FF14 was a slog I put myself through in order to get to the good stuff. And once I got to Heaven's Word, Stormblood, that's quality, not only MMO gaming, but just video game storytelling in general. Realm Reborn did not really offer any of that. So I'm not a huge fan of the base game there. And I prefer both of these other games to it. But with that said, Fallout 3, I feel much the same way as I do KOTOR, where I like the Obsidian take on it better. I think Fallout New Vegas is just a much more interesting, well-written, and creative Western RPG. And after that came out, I feel no reason to ever go back to Fallout 3, even though for its time and that whole opening when you first get out of the vault, when that came out, that was pretty unreal. But other than that, there isn't too much interesting things going on in terms of the narrative or writing compared to what came out with New Vegas. And Persona 3, I'd give it probably my personal, I would like it to win, and I think it will win out of this section. Obviously, it's the game that defined what Persona is today. Persona 4 and Persona 5 are, after all, just iterations on Persona 3 with using the social link system. And although the core dungeon crawling of Persona 3 is definitely worse than what Persona 4 and 5 offer, with just going up Tartarus the entire game. I think it still has the best core cast of the series. I love the characters. I love how real their dynamics feel. Nothing about it feels too forced or Saturday cartoony. and there's like real kind of issues being explored with these characters and with their dynamics with each other. I think it's got a great soundtrack still. I'm a big fan of Persona 3 and would give it the pick here.
Yeah, I've only played P3P for Persona 3, but I think I'm leaning towards it as well, given just how it's set up and the gameplay. I'm not a huge fan of Tartarus, but I love the implementation of the social links, and just the overall story and characters are really interesting. And
it was the last Persona game to that point still feel like Shin Megami Tensei in terms of its vibe. Like, it was extremely dark, and was not scared to put these characters through the ringer dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like, I will jump in here and say that, like, as I said earlier, Persona 3 is a game that I have not played. And so, like, I can't render any sort of a real opinion on it. But it is also the game that I hope wins this bracket. Which is weird, as Final Fantasy XIV is probably like, if you have to take it in totality, it's got to be my favorite game of all time, because I've spent 5,000 hours on it. But, like, I adore Persona 2 and think that Persona 4 and 5 in many ways pale in comparison, especially to Innocent Sin. I think Innocent Sin has one of the best stories of any JRPG.
Absolutely.
I think it's remarkable. The gameplay's freaking terrible, but the story is so good. Like, it is, like, I get a little emotional just thinking about it right now. And so it makes me sad that Persona became sort of this weird imitation of what Persona 4 was, right? And Persona 4 is fine. I like it, and it's stylish and it's fun, and Persona 5 makes it better. And I don't understand anybody who likes Persona 4 the best, because I don't. Persona 4 is fine, but it's fine is the best I can say for it. Whereas, like, Persona 3, to me, from what I've read about it, strikes me as you said, like, this beautiful balancing act between what Persona becomes and what Persona was.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things I like about both of those versions of Persona. I haven't played Fallout or any Fallout games. My only experience, true story, with Fallout is playing 4 hours of Fallout 76 in beta. That game in beta as my very first assignment at RPGFan. And it was miserable, and I never, ever, ever want to touch Fallout again. And so I hate Fallout 3 in retrospect, even though I haven't played it. A Realm Reborn is hard to judge nowadays for me, because I picked up 14 when we were in Shadowbringers. And I agree with everything you said, Aleks. Like, A Realm Reborn was fine. It was like, oh, this is like some junk I have to do to get to the good stuff. But I have to respect what it did. And I have to respect the fact that MMOs, and I played like WoW briefly in like 2006, and I hated it, like despised it. Like, everybody in my house that I live with was like dropping out of college to go play it for 30 hours a week. More than that, 30 hours is low. And so I was like, oh, I'll try it. And I was like, oh, it's just like leveling, and I'm going to go fight these mobs. And that sounds like horrible. And it was horrible. Whereas Realm Reborn, I imagine, even in its original iteration, is at least like focusing on storytelling in a way that I care about. But it, in a modern context, is not even close to the strong. It's like the weakest expansion, right? Like, I played it before they did the fix where they fixed some of the patch quests in that game, and they were like so miserable that like I almost fell off of the game briefly, even though I loved it. And now, like, I play it. When we finish this recording, I'm going to go try to clear P10 again with my static group. So I think there are enough weaknesses that it shouldn't belong in this conversation. So I think Persona 3 is the pick here. I think it should be the pick here, and I think it will be the pick here.
You know,
Zach?
Actually, listening to this conversation about these three games that it hadn't occurred to me before is, I think they're all similar in the fact that they're like a shift from, you know, the games previous to them. Like, so Fallout 3 is like the first Fallout that really went mainstream with the first person view and it isn't isometric. Persona 3 is kind of like what you said, like what we think of now. It's like, to me, I know I've heard the joke before that to Atlas, Persona 1 and 2 don't exist. And so Persona 3 is like the shift for modern Persona. And then obviously Final Fantasy 14, they kind of rebooted the whole thing from what I've read about. It was like a failed launch and hence the name A Realm Reborn. So they're all similar in that regard. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it really is, actually. It's an interesting bracket.
Aleks, what were we going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm sorry to hear about your Fallout experience. That sounds like a really terrible way to play that series. But if I'm going to play Suikoden 2, you should play Fallout New Vegas, because Fallout New Vegas is one of the best RPGs ever, right. I think.
Aleks, I like you enough that I might do that. I might just do that.
You should. It's
and
awesome.
The normal host of this podcast is a huge fan of New Vegas, so I feel like I need to say that I will reconsider it.
Yeah, I will second that. New Vegas is definitely my favorite Fallout game.
It's on my backlog.
Mine too. But like Western RPGs just like don't jive with me, man. Like I don't want that level of like thought. Like I want a curated experience usually. If I want that level of thought, I'll just go back and play Disco Elysium again because that game. Chef's kiss.
New Vegas is almost on that level in terms of
rating.
Bro,
there is no way that's true. There is no way that's true. Are you serious?
Not in terms of like the actual like subject matter, but in terms of like the creativity with what you can do as you're like playing through and like kind of interacting with characters and developing your relationships and allegiances. It is fascinating. It does some really cool things.
That is a great sell. That's a great sell. All right. I will download it the minute I get off this podcast.
Yes.
Okay. So now, because we're not going to do another one of these, because readers, as you know, or as I've said earlier, there will be multiple rounds of this. So you all will vote on what the top 8 will be, and then we will seed based on that. I'm guessing John, I won't give us another podcast after this, which means that we will not have the opportunity to talk about the final 8 or the 4 or the 2 or the 1. So the question is, panelists, when you're looking at the overall sort of like what we have here, what is the game that you think will win out of all 24 games? And then also, what is the game that you think should win? So we'll start with you, Aleks. What do you think?
So this is tough, but I got to go with what my gut was going in. And obviously, some of the things you said, Zach, have made me second guess this now. But I think Persona 5 will win. I guess I'm not considering the readership too much in that decision, but just in terms of like what this game ended up like establishing, like even further solidifying like the eliteness of Persona in the JRPG community, and just in terms of like how playable it is, how well designed the palaces are compared to the 2 games that came before. Like it's such a smooth game to play. It still has a lot of cool character interactions, and the social links are probably the best in the series. I just think this game has so much going on in terms of being an RPG and a social sim and marrying those elements so smoothly and being such a smooth gameplay experience. Overall, that was kind of my gut feeling as the overall pick. But in terms of what should win, I think Dragon Quest XI, just for the reason that like you and I both said, Zach, this is the most perfect RPG ever made, I think. It is just so playable, so full of joy, and just something any RPG fan should experience.
That is an excellent response. What do you think, Jimmy?
I actually think that Dragon Quest XI has a chance to win. I could see either of the Dragon Quests, or maybe Final Fantasy 12. I think it's going to be one of those, big name JRPG franchises that takes home the whole thing. However, what I think should win, in my personal opinion, Mass Effect 2 is just the peak of gaming, at least for me anyway. I've played that game, gosh, I don't know how many times at this point, but I will continue to play it for as long as I can, because it's almost the perfect game for me. So if I was picking, that's my winner.
That is an excellent response. What about you, Audra?
I want to say, just because of all of the talk about the remake coming up and everything, I kind of am leaning towards Persona 3 might win.
I love that pick.
Yeah.
It's a good pick.
Just, it has a lot of iterations of the game out already, and people love it, and I just think it might have a chance. As for which game I would love to see win, either Dragon Quest XI or Mass Effect 2, honestly, would be my picks. But I think for different reasons, but they're both, to me, quintessential RPGs.
Those are all excellent picks. At least for me personally, I think in terms of what will win, and I hate to say this, it was a game that early on in this podcast, I literally argued against everyone for. And that is, I think Skies of Arcadia is going to be the winner. I think it's because our podcast listeners are Skies of Arcadia fans. I think also because one of our most famous podcasters was a huge Skies of Arcadia fan. We've sort of attracted that group. And I also think that it appeals to such a wide range of people that I think that Skies of Arcadia, despite the fact that it was sort of tied to two consoles that are not as popular as others, I think it might win. If I had to pick a secondary pick, I think it would be Remake. I think one of those two was going to win that match in the division, and I think that whatever wins that match is going to win the whole thing. So that's my genuine opinion. The idea that Final Fantasy VII Remake is the best RPG ever is absurd to me. Same thing is true for Skies of Arcadia, but that's also the way these things go sometimes.
Yeah, that would be crazy. It's not even the best Final Fantasy VII ever.
Yeah, right. I don't disagree. I'm just saying the way that I think this is going to go. In terms of what I think should win, I'm actually genuinely thinking about that right now. I'm between two. I think The Witcher 3 is maybe the most remarkable achievement in RPGs ever. Even though I haven't even beaten it, I haven't played the DLC, which is apparently amazing. I think The Witcher 3 is I don't know, man. It's just so ahead of everybody else in terms of the way that it combines Western RPG like their conceptions of what good storytelling is and JRPGs. I think it's remarkable, but in terms of my favorite on this list, it's Endwalker. Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker has, in my opinion, one of the 3 or 4 best stories in RPG history. I think that it continues the perfection that is the MMO combat that is Shadowbringers, and I think that it deserves to win, but I don't know. The Witcher 3 is darn close. I didn't actually make any picks there, and I make no apologies.
But what should actually win is Dark Souls.
That actually might be true. I just started Bloodborne recently, and I hate it and myself, but it's also amazing.
Yeah, you'll love it eventually. And yourself.
All right. So thank you all so much for coming onto this podcast. I had a great time talking about all these. These are all Game of the Year winners, right? Even if we don't think they necessarily deserve to win, they're at least pretty good games up to all-time classics that should crush their competition, and they might not. We'll see. So yeah, I had a great time chatting with all of you. So let's go into some housekeeping here. So if you want to contact us, at least as a podcast, I'll get to individuals later. You can email us, podcast@rpgfan.com. You can also find us on all kinds of platforms. We're on Threads, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're even on Facebook, even though I guess we're all kind of old, honestly. And you can follow us there. You can also follow us on YouTube. We have a Twitch stream almost every day. Scott does an amazing job, so you can follow us there. We also have a shop. You can buy onesies that have RPG-Fan repping on them. You can also follow us on our other podcasts as well. Retro Encounter, which is a podcast I sometimes host, but Mike Slosey usually hosts about retro things. And you can also follow us on Rhythm Encounter, which is usually hosted by Mike Sobato, our editor-in-chief, but sometimes also by Hillary Andriff, and occasionally by others as well. If you want to give us a review, you can review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you listen to this podcast. Give us a review. It's helpful. If you enjoyed this, that's even more helpful. And before we close out, let's talk about where we can find the individual panelists, starting with you, Aleks.
Yeah, you could just email me at alexfranicek@gmail.com. Happy to hear any frustrated emails about why there are no Souls games at One Game of the Year.
I think that is totally fair. What about you, Audra?
Email for me, audrab@rpgfan.com.
Perfect. And what about you, Jimmy?
You can find me on the RPG Fan Discord is probably the best way to reach out for me. I'm starting to get a little active on there, doing my best. I'm not on any social media, so.
And what's your handle on Discord, Jimmy?
Oh, sorry, it's a Turner-based XP, so at least I have a cool, catchy name.
That is excellent.
Cool. That
is excellent. Turner-based. I love that. And if you want to get in touch with me, probably the best way is still email, zachw@rpgfan.com. I'm also on Discord in general. Zach W is the best way to find me there on our Discord. If you can't figure out who I am, eventually you'll find me if you look at like the staff list on the Discord itself. So I'm there. So thank you everybody who joined me today. I thought it was a great conversation. I don't know what's going to win this genuinely, even after a conversation. I think that Persona 3 actually has a great chance, even though we'll see. And I'm kind of secretly rooting for Lunar. But anyway, thank you, everybody. And whatever you're playing, I hope you have fun.